At first glance, it's a simple statement, but beneath its calm surface lies one of the most powerful psychological tools you can use in human interaction. This phrase doesn't attack, it doesn't defend, and it doesn't emotionally overreact. Instead, it exposes. It takes what is usually hidden, the subtle motives, manipulative tactics, or passive-aggressive undertones, and brings them into the light. People who rely on control, guilt, or confusion to dominate conversations depend on one thing: your lack of awareness. The moment you name their game, you change the rules entirely. When someone tries to emotionally corner you, they expect you to react impulsively. They feed on confusion, guilt, or your instinct to explain yourself. But by calmly saying, "I see what you're trying to do," you don't fall into their trap, you step outside it. This single sentence shifts the psychological power balance. Suddenly, the manipulator is no longer the one controlling the narrative. You are. It's not a loud declaration. It's a mirror held up to their behavior. And mirrors make people uncomfortable when they're playing games. This response works in multiple situations. Imagine someone uses guilt tripping to make you comply. "Oh, I guess you don't care about me anymore since you're too busy to help." They're baiting you emotionally, expecting you to rush into defensive explanations. Instead, a calm and steady, "I see what you're trying to do," cuts through the emotional fog. It stops the manipulation from advancing because it signals clearly and quietly that you're not confused. You understand the tactic. And once a tactic is exposed, it loses much of its power. Consider another situation: passive-aggressive criticism. Someone might say, "Well, I wouldn't have done it that way, but you do you." The intention isn't constructive, it's to plant doubt, to subtly undermine. Responding defensively gives them control, while ignoring it lets it linger. But saying, "I see what you're trying to do," brings their hidden intention into the open. It's not aggressive, but it disarms their approach. It forces them to confront the fact that their subtle jabs aren't invisible anymore. In professional settings, this phrase can be a shield against power plays. Sometimes people use loaded questions, insinuations, or strategic ambiguity to put you in a difficult position. They want to see you squirm, react, or give away your position. But calmly recognizing the underlying move stops the momentum. It communicates intelligence, emotional control, and a refusal to play by manipulative rules. You don't need to accuse anyone of manipulation directly. Simply naming that you see their strategy is enough to change the entire tone. On a deeper level, this phrase also has an internal effect. When you say, "I see what you're trying to do," you're not just addressing the other person, you're affirming your own clarity. You're telling yourself, "I recognize the dynamic, I'm not lost in it." That internal clarity is what keeps emotional manipulation from taking root. Many people get pulled into draining arguments or controlling dynamics because they don't pause to analyze what's happening beneath the surface. This phrase is a reminder to step back, observe, and stay grounded. This statement is also powerful because of its neutral tone. It doesn't say, "You're manipulating me," which would invite defensiveness or escalation. It simply observes behavior without judgment. Neutrality is key. When said with composure, it creates a subtle tension. The other person is forced to either clarify their true intentions or backtrack. In both cases, you've interrupted their pattern and regained control of the emotional rhythm of the conversation. Emotionally intelligent people use this response as a boundary marker. It's not about winning arguments or humiliating others. It's about refusing to participate in unhealthy communication patterns. Instead of matching manipulation with aggression or retreating into silence, you choose awareness. You choose to hold the other person accountable to the reality of their actions without hostility. It's also worth noting that this phrase requires emotional steadiness to be effective. If said sarcastically or with anger, it can sound accusatory and escalate tension. But when delivered calmly and evenly, it becomes incredibly difficult to counter. The strength of the phrase comes from its detached clarity, not from emotional intensity. That's why it can be used even in high-stakes situations without causing unnecessary conflict. In relationships, whether personal or professional, this kind of awareness protects you from becoming entangled in psychological games. People who use manipulation often rely on emotional shortcuts to get their way. They might appeal to guilt, fear, obligation, or pride. But once you develop the habit of mentally naming what's happening, they're using guilt right now, or this is an intimidation tactic, you stop reacting blindly. I see what you're trying to do is the verbal expression of that internal clarity. This response also subtly communicates boundaries without confrontation. You're essentially saying, I'm not going to be pulled into this dynamic without having to explain, argue, or justify. Boundaries don't always need to be shouted. Sometimes they're as simple as calmly naming reality. And often, that's far more powerful. There's a quiet strength in not being easily manipulated. It doesn't mean you're cold or unkind. It means you're self-aware. You're not living on emotional autopilot, reacting to every external push. You're observing, choosing, responding with intention. And people who rely on emotional tactics often find that incredibly unsettling because their usual methods stop working. When you consistently use this kind of strategic awareness, you become more emotionally stable in all kinds of interactions. You stop wasting energy on unnecessary conflicts. You stop over-explaining yourself to people who don't deserve that energy. You stop letting others define the emotional tempo of the conversation. Instead, you hold the rhythm. You set the tone. You keep your peace. This statement is more than just a polite way to disagree. It is a boundary-setting tool, a verbal anchor that separates emotional entanglement from self-respect. At its core, this phrase acknowledges two truths. People have the right to their perspectives, and so do you. It's a reminder that agreement is not a requirement for coexistence. In a world where many conversations quickly spiral into arguments, this response stands as a firm yet calm declaration of autonomy. When someone tries to impose their beliefs, this statement gently but powerfully blocks that imposition. It doesn't attack their opinion, nor does it surrender yours. Instead, it creates space between you and them, a psychological distance where mutual respect can exist, even if the viewpoints clash. Many people become defensive when confronted with disagreement because they assume the only options are to either fight to win or give in to keep the peace. This phrase presents a third path: stand your ground without hostility. In emotionally charged situations, people often confuse validation with agreement. They believe that if you don't agree with them, you're rejecting them personally. But you're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine, separates the person from the perspective. It communicates that you respect their right to think differently, but you also respect yourself enough not to abandon your own beliefs. This balance is critical for maintaining emotional independence in conversations that are meant to sway, control, or guilt you. Consider how this phrase works during manipulative debates. Sometimes individuals deliberately push their views aggressively to corner you. They expect you to either conform or justify yourself endlessly. By calmly asserting, "You're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine," you remove the emotional fuel that powers their argument. You signal that their approval or agreement is not a prerequisite for your confidence. This psychological shift often takes them by surprise because it denies them the emotional tug of war they were expecting. In personal relationships, this phrase can serve as a shield against overbearing behavior. Some people use their opinions as weapons, ways to control, belittle, or dominate others. They treat disagreement as disloyalty or disrespect. But this statement calmly disrupts that dynamic. It's not confrontational, yet it's firm. It reminds them that you're an individual with your own mind, not a mirror reflecting their thoughts back at them. That quiet assertion of individuality is often enough to reset the emotional balance in a conversation. In professional environments, this response is equally valuable. Meetings, negotiations, and workplace discussions often involve conflicting perspectives. Emotional reactivity can escalate tensions unnecessarily, but saying, "You're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine," communicates maturity, confidence, and emotional control. It shows that you can handle disagreement without losing composure. This often earns more respect than aggressive debating or passive silence ever could. It frames you as someone who is not threatened by opposing views, but also not easily swayed from your position. This statement also carries psychological weight because it's rooted in self-assuredness. Insecure individuals often feel compelled to convince everyone to agree with them, as if differing opinions diminish their worth. But when you can calmly acknowledge both perspectives, you demonstrate that your identity is not fragile. You don't need external validation to maintain internal stability. This kind of grounded confidence often disarms those who rely on dominance or persuasion to feel powerful. Another subtle strength of this phrase is its neutral tone. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't mock. It doesn't belittle. It simply states a fact. Both people are entitled to their views. This neutrality is powerful because it takes away emotional leverage from those who thrive on conflict. When someone tries to bait you into a heated exchange and you respond with calm detachment, they lose control over the emotional tempo of the interaction. Instead of being pulled into their rhythm, you keep your own. It's also important to recognize that this statement is a boundary marker, not an invitation to debate further. By saying it, you're signaling that you respect the other person's right to speak, but that your stance is not up for negotiation. This can be particularly useful with individuals who refuse to accept differing viewpoints and constantly push for alignment. Instead of explaining yourself repeatedly or becoming defensive, you draw a clear line that ends the push without unnecessary hostility. In family dynamics, this phrase can bring clarity to conversations that might otherwise spiral into emotional confrontations. Families often carry unspoken expectations that everyone should think, act, or believe the same way. Disagreeing can trigger guilt, pressure, or emotional manipulation. But calmly asserting your right to your own perspective reminds others that love and agreement are not the same thing. You can maintain connection without surrendering your individuality. Internally, this phrase strengthens your sense of personal sovereignty. It's a verbal reflection of knowing who you are and not needing others to validate that identity. When you use it consistently, you train yourself to respond to disagreements with calm clarity rather than emotional defensiveness. This not only protects your peace, but also gradually changes the dynamics of your relationships. People learn that your opinions are not easily shaken and that your self-worth isn't up for negotiation. In discussions about sensitive or controversial topics, this phrase also prevents emotional entanglement. It allows conversations to remain civil even when values clash. By separating personal identity from opinions, you reduce the intensity of the disagreement. Instead of trying to control each other's perspectives, both parties can accept coexistence of differing views. This doesn't mean you agree with the other person. It means you refuse to be pulled into unnecessary battles for mental territory. The elegance of this response lies in its simplicity. You're not trying to prove who's right or wrong. You're not defending your character. You're not explaining yourself to someone who may not even be interested in understanding. You're simply asserting your right to think independently, just as you allow them the same. That quiet strength often speaks louder than any argument ever could. This phrase is deceptively simple, yet it carries a subtle psychological power that can completely shift the direction of a conversation. On the surface, it sounds curious, polite, even neutral. But beneath that calm exterior lies a strategic tool that can disarm arrogance, expose weak arguments, and redirect control without confrontation. It's not aggressive, defensive, or submissive. It's observational. By saying, "Interesting, tell me more," you're giving the other person the space to continue, but on your terms, not theirs. When people make bold statements, manipulative remarks, or emotionally charged claims, they often expect a particular reaction. Some want resistance so they can argue. Others want agreement so they can dominate the narrative. Very few expect calm curiosity. That's why this phrase works so effectively. It disrupts their script. Instead of escalating or retreating, you invite them to elaborate. You let them keep talking, and in doing so, they often reveal more than they intended. In debates or emotionally intense conversations, people often rely on shock value or authority to silence others. They make a strong statement expecting immediate compliance or pushback. But when you respond with, "Interesting, tell me more," you don't grant them that emotional leverage. You signal that you're not intimidated or reactive. You're simply observing. This neutral stance often catches them off guard. They must now shift from dramatic declarations to providing substance, and many can't. This phrase is especially powerful in situations where someone uses manipulation through vagueness. For example, someone might say, "Everyone knows you're not really committed." This is a loaded statement designed to trigger guilt, defense, or emotional explanations. But calmly responding with, "Interesting, tell me more," forces them to unpack their claim. They either have to bring evidence, which you can calmly address, or they stumble because their remark was never meant to be examined logically. It was meant to provoke. In power dynamics, such as workplace settings or hierarchical conversations, this response subtly shifts control. Instead of pushing back, against a superior's opinion or getting defensive in front of colleagues. Interesting. Tell me more shows emotional maturity and confidence. It allows you to gather more information while appearing engaged and composed. This can uncover inconsistencies in their argument, give you time to think, and place the burden of explanation back on them. Psychologically, this phrase also triggers a useful effect. People love to talk about their own ideas. When you invite them to elaborate, most will happily keep speaking, often revealing their reasoning, emotions, or hidden motivations. This gives you insight without you revealing your stance prematurely. You become the one who observes while they expose, which is a far stronger position than reacting impulsively to every statement. Another reason this phrase works is because it avoids binary confrontation. Most disagreements fall into a predictable rhythms: statement, opposition, defense, escalation. But curiosity breaks that pattern. Interesting. Tell me more. Doesn't reject their perspective outright, but it doesn't accept it either. It occupies a middle ground that forces the other person to keep providing input while you retain your calm. This slows down the pace of heated conversations and allows logic to re-enter where emotion might have taken over. In emotionally manipulative relationships, this phrase can be a subtle shield. Manipulators often rely on your immediate emotional reactions, guilt, fear, defensiveness, to control the conversation. By responding with measured curiosity, you're refusing to give them that emotional foothold. For instance, if someone says, "You've changed and not for the better," they expect you to either apologize or argue. But if you say, "Interesting, tell me more," you're neither agreeing nor defending. You're observing. And observation breaks the emotional spell manipulation depends on. This response is also useful in uncovering hidden intentions or power plays. People sometimes make statements with layered meanings, hoping to steer conversations subtly. When you invite them to elaborate, you strip away ambiguity. Their true motivations often surface when they're forced to keep talking beyond their rehearsed lines. It's like pulling a thread and watching the rest of the fabric unravel. Many rhetorical or manipulative statements sound strong in isolation, but fall apart when examined under calm questioning. It's important to note that tone matters deeply when using this phrase. Said sarcastically, it can sound mocking and escalate tension. But when delivered genuinely and calmly, it's disarming. The key is neutral curiosity, not exaggerated interest, not skepticism, just steady engagement. This keeps the emotional temperature low and encourages the other person to reveal themselves without feeling directly attacked. In intellectual discussions, debates, or even casual disagreements, "Interesting, tell me more," can foster a more insightful exchange. Instead of rushing to defend your own perspective, you give yourself time to fully understand theirs. Sometimes this leads to finding unexpected common ground. Other times, it allows you to identify weak points in their reasoning that you can later address calmly and effectively. Either way, you gain more clarity before deciding how to respond further. This phrase also serves as a psychological pause button for you. It buys you time. Instead of scrambling to respond immediately, you create space to think. Many arguments are lost not because someone had a weaker point, but because they reacted too quickly and emotionally. Curiosity gives your brain a moment to assess the situation strategically. You're not just hearing words, you're analyzing patterns, motives, and emotional undertones. It's also a way to de-escalate conversations that are on the verge of becoming confrontational. People often soften their tone when they feel heard and interesting. Tell me more. Gives them that sense of being acknowledged without you needing to agree. It prevents unnecessary battles over ego and shifts the focus back to understanding rather than winning. In social dynamics, this phrase positions you as someone who listens deeply and doesn't get easily rattled. That kind of presence naturally commands respect because it's rare. Most people are eager to prove their point, defend their stance, or outwit others. Few have the discipline to stay calm, listen, and observe. And those who can do that hold quiet power in conversations. Using this phrase consistently can transform the way you navigate complex interactions. You stop getting pulled into every emotional tug of war. You stop wasting energy on unnecessary arguments. You start seeing conversations as opportunities to understand, assess, and influence rather than battles to be won or lost. This phrase may sound simple, but it carries a unique power in conversations, especially when dealing with strong opinions, arrogance, or subtle attempts to dominate. It's not confrontational, it's not submissive, and it doesn't reveal your full stance. Instead, it creates a psychological buffer, a calm space between what someone says and how you choose to respond. It acknowledges their perspective without validating it, and it maintains your boundaries without starting unnecessary conflict. When people express their views, especially forcefully, they often expect one of two responses: agreement or resistance. If you agree, they feel validated. If you resist, they prepare to argue. But that's one way to see it. Disrupts that binary expectation. It's a third option, a neutral acknowledgement that neither surrenders your ground nor invites debate. This subtle disruption shifts the balance of control in the conversation. This phrase is particularly effective in dealing with arrogant or self-righteous individuals. These are the people who present their opinions as absolute facts, expecting everyone around them to conform. When you respond with, "That's one way to see it," you quietly remind them that their view is just one perspective among many. You don't have to challenge their ego directly. You simply acknowledge the statement in a way that neither fuels their sense of superiority nor diminishes your own. In heated discussions, this phrase acts as a cooling agent. It lowers the emotional temperature because it doesn't push back aggressively. People who are expecting an argument often get thrown off balance when they don't receive one. Instead of escalating, the conversation often stalls just long enough for the intensity to drop. You're not agreeing, you're not disagreeing, you're simply stepping aside and letting the emotional wave pass without getting pulled into it. Another strength of this response lies in its strategic vagueness. It doesn't reveal what you truly think. This is useful when you don't want to show all your cards too early, especially in situations involving manipulation, negotiation, or power dynamics. By saying, "That's one way to see it," you keep your position ambiguous, which can be an advantage. The other person doesn't get the satisfaction of knowing whether they've swayed you or not. They can't adjust their tactics based on your reaction because you haven't given them one. In manipulative conversations, people often rely on emotional hooks to drag you into their narrative. They use guilt, fear, shame, or moral superiority to pressure you into compliance. But when you respond with this calm, detached phrase, you're not giving them anything to work with. You're not rejecting them in a way that invites more pressure, but you're also not validating their control. It's a way of quietly disengaging from the emotional pull without appearing defensive. In professional settings, this phrase can be especially useful when you're faced with dominant personalities or strong opinions in meetings. Responding with, "That's one way to see it," communicates emotional intelligence and composure. You're showing that you've heard them, but you're not rushed into agreement. It also gives you time to assess the situation further, observe others' reactions, or prepare a more strategic response later. In environments where politics and perception matter, this kind of measured communication is often more effective than blunt disagreement. This phrase is also a valuable tool in personal relationships where disagreements can quickly become emotional. Sometimes loved ones express their opinions in ways that feel critical or imposing. Directly opposing them might escalate the conflict, while agreeing might compromise your boundaries. That's one way to see it. Gives you breathing space. It acknowledges their right to their perspective without letting that perspective define you. Over time, using this kind of neutral response can help prevent unnecessary arguments and maintain emotional balance in relationships. On a deeper level, this phrase reflects a mindset of internal stability. People who feel insecure often feel compelled to argue their point every time someone disagrees with them. They see differing opinions as threats that must be defeated. But people who are confident in their own identity don't need to win every conversation. That's one way to see it. Reflects that quiet strength. You're not dismissing their view. You're simply recognizing that it's not the only one. Psychologically, this phrase also has a disarming effect because it avoids feeding the ego of the other person. Arrogant individuals often thrive on opposition. It gives them a chance to demonstrate superiority. But when you respond with neutral acknowledgement, you deprive them of that opportunity. They can't show off their debating skills if you don't engage in the debate. They can't prove you wrong if you're not trying to prove them wrong. This leaves them with little to push against, often causing them to lose momentum. Tone plays a critical role here. If you say, "That's one way to see it," sarcastically, it can sound dismissive and provoke defensiveness. But when said calmly, with genuine neutrality, it conveys confidence and emotional control. It's the tone of someone who knows they don't need to dominate or be dominated. This controlled delivery amplifies the psychological effect of the phrase, making it far more powerful than its simplicity might suggest. This response also works well in situations where the conversation isn't worth your energy. Not every opinion needs to be challenged, and not every disagreement needs to be resolved. Sometimes the most strategic move is to acknowledge the statement lightly and move on. That's one way to see it. Is perfect for this because it closes the conversational loop without creating unnecessary friction. You don't have to pretend to agree, and you don't have to get pulled into proving anything. In social interactions, this phrase signals that you're not easily swayed, but you're also not rigidly confrontational. It places you in a position of calm authority. Someone who listens but doesn't absorb everything uncritically. People often find this presence quietly intimidating because it's hard to manipulate someone who won't take the bait. They can't provoke you. They can't win your compliance through pressure. and they can't easily read your position. It's also a way to practice mental detachment. By framing their opinion as or one way to see it, you're mentally categorizing it as a perspective, not as an absolute truth that you must accept or reject immediately. This kind of detachment is crucial in maintaining emotional control during challenging conversations. It allows you to remain centered even when others are pushing strongly for their viewpoint. Ultimately, this phrase is not about winning or losing conversations. It's about holding your ground without unnecessary friction. It's about maintaining clarity when others try to impose their perspectives. It's about protecting your mental space while respecting theirs. It's a small phrase, but it carries a strategic weight that can transform how you navigate interactions with confidence and calm. In a world that glorifies quick comebacks, witty replies, and verbal dominance, silence is often mistaken for weakness. But in reality, silence can be one of the most powerful psychological tools you have. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't justify, it simply exists, creating a pause that unsettles manipulation, disrupts emotional games, and forces clarity to surface. Silence has a weight that words often lack, and when used intentionally, it can change the entire direction of a conversation. People expect responses. When they speak, especially in moments of conflict, manipulation, or provocation, they rely on a predictable rhythm, statement followed by reaction. That rhythm gives them control, whether consciously or unconsciously. But when you introduce silence into that rhythm, you break their pattern. The moment you stop feeding into the conversational momentum, the balance of power shifts. The other person is left with their own words hanging in the air, and that space often reveals more than any immediate response could. Silence is especially effective when dealing with manipulative tactics. Manipulators depend on emotional reactions. They use guilt, anger, pressure, or confusion to push you into defending yourself, explaining too much, or complying too quickly. But when you stay silent, you deny them the reaction they need to keep control. You don't fight their narrative, and you don't feed it either. You let their words linger in the space between you, and that silence becomes a mirror that reflects their intentions back to them. Many manipulators become uncomfortable in the face of silence because they can no longer steer the emotional direction. In heated arguments, silence acts as a psychological anchor. Emotions run high, words get sharp, and people often say things they later regret simply because they were too reactive. Choosing silence in such moments isn't weakness, it's strategy. It allows emotional intensity to burn itself out without adding more fuel. While others get lost in defending, attacking, or proving, your silence holds steady. That steadiness is often far more intimidating and commanding than any loud retort could ever be. Silence also has a unique way of forcing self-reflection. When someone says something provocative, they usually expect to be met with resistance or agreement. If neither comes, they're left alone with their statement. They might start to question their words, rethink their tone, or feel the weight of what they said more deeply. This is why silence can make people backtrack, clarify, or even expose their true motives without you having to say a single thing. It's a way of inviting the truth out by removing distraction. In professional environments, silence can be a subtle but powerful negotiation tool. When someone makes an offer, a proposal, or a demand, filling the space with chatter often weakens your position. But holding silence after they speak creates psychological pressure, not on you, but on them. People naturally want to fill silence, especially in formal settings. They might start revealing additional information, softening their stance, or making concessions simply because they can't handle the weight of the quiet. Skilled negotiators understand that silence isn't passive, it's a tactical pause. In personal relationships, silence can communicate boundaries more clearly than words. Sometimes explaining yourself repeatedly to someone who refuses to listen doesn't create understanding. It just drains your energy. Silence says, without hostility, I won't engage on this level anymore. It's a way of stepping out of emotional tug-of wars without making a dramatic exit. This kind of silence is firm, not cold. It's self-respecting. It protects your peace without demanding validation. Silence can also be used as a listening tool. In conversations, many people are more focused on what they'll say next than on what's actually being said. By staying silent intentionally, you create space for deeper truths to emerge. People often reveal their real thoughts and emotions not in response to questions, but in the space that follows their own words. When you give them silence, they fill it, often with details they hadn't planned to share. This is especially useful in understanding hidden motives, emotional undercurrents, or unresolved issues. One of the reasons silence is underestimated is because society often equates talking with power. We're taught to speak up, defend ourselves, and fill awkward pauses quickly. But this conditioning overlooks the fact that real power often lies in composure. Silence requires emotional control. It requires the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix it or explain it away. And people who can do that hold a quiet authority that's hard to challenge. Silence can also reveal the true dynamics of a relationship or conversation. When you stop talking, you start noticing. You notice who rushes to fill the silence, who becomes uncomfortable, who reveals themselves through their reactions. Silence acts like a spotlight. It doesn't say anything itself, but it illuminates everything else. This kind of observation is impossible when you're constantly responding or defending. It's also important to understand that silence is not the same as withdrawal. Strategic silence isn't about shutting down or avoiding conflict. It's about choosing not to engage on someone else's emotional terms. It's active, not passive. It's a conscious decision to step back, observe, and let the situation reveal itself before you decide on your next move. That's why silence is often used by emotionally intelligent individuals. They know the value of timing, and they understand that not every situation requires immediate verbal input. Silence disrupts ego-driven interactions as well. Many arguments are not about truth, but about pride. People want to win, to feel superior, to prove their point. When you don't participate in that ego dance, the energy of the conversation changes. Silence doesn't feed ego, and ego cannot thrive without attention. This often leaves domineering personalities unsettled because their usual methods of control stop working. Another powerful aspect of silence is how it affects memory and impact. Words can be forgotten quickly in the noise of an argument, but silence lingers. People remember how the silence made them feel. They remember the discomfort, the unexpected pause, the weight of their own words echoing back at them. This is why silence often leaves a stronger impression than verbal rebuttals. It creates an emotional experience, not just an exchange of words, Using silence effectively requires emotional discipline. The urge to fill the space, defend yourself, or explain is strong, especially when provoked. But the ability to remain quiet in key moments comes from a place of inner strength. It means you trust your presence more than your explanations. You don't need to prove anything, you let the silence do the work. Silence also encourages authentic communication. When the noise stops, what remains is what truly matters. Beneath the layers of defensiveness, manipulation, or posturing, silence often brings forward sincerity. It clears away the clutter, allowing real emotions and truths to emerge naturally without force.